Good afternoon. We'd like to welcome you to the June 22nd workshop and board meeting beginning at 4:45 in the afternoon. I begin with a call to order and a roll call vote.
Mr. Fayette.
Here.
Ms. Catulli.
Here.
Mrs. Davidson.
Here.
Mrs. Hill.
Here.
Mr. Pohan.
Here.
And I would like to read also that the Los Alamitos USD will be implementing California Department of Public Health guidance, which no longer requires social distancing in public settings. CDPH requires that unvaccinated individuals wear face coverings when indoors. Therefore, we request that unvaccinated individuals wear a mask covering while indoors. By physically attending this meeting without wearing a mask covering, you are attesting that you have met the requirements of the CDPH's June 15, 2021 guidance for the use of face coverings. And we will now move on to adoption of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against? 5-0 carries. It's so strange to not have to do a roll call vote on everything. Now I'm going to have to unlearn that. Okay. Now we move on to public comments. The board welcomes input from the public. This is the opportunity for community members to address the board on workshop and closed session items only. Public comments on all other agenda items or items not listed on the agenda will occur during open session at 6:30. Do we have any public comments? We have none. Therefore, we will now move on to our workshop, and I would like to introduce Mrs. Felicia, to introduce the Measure G Potential Projects and Cash Flow Workshop.
Executive Cabinet and distinguished guests, I'm honored today to come forward and present to you our Measure G Potential Project and Cash Flow. I'm excited because we've been postponing this for a few months, and it's truly an honor for me to come before you and present this along with my co-presenter, CJ Nolan, who we're going to go over some of the current projects that we have right now under our Measure G, and what are those potential projects, and what does our cash flow look like moving forward. So today we're going to be looking at the scope of a new gym, what that would look like, as well as a classroom modernization, and what kind of funds do we currently have for a proposed performing arts center modernization. So CJ is going to review what the scope of work would be for a 2-court, 3-court, practice, or competitive, as well as he's going to review what the cost itemization menu of the classroom and what kind of potential funds we would have for the Performing Arts Center. So with that, I just want to go over what our current projects and what the budgets we currently have established for these projects that we have currently in place. So right now, at the high school, we've completed the infrastructure project, and that came out to about a little over $22 million. That project has completed, and we currently have underway is the multi-story building. As you remember, that's about $67 million. And we have completed, to a certain extent, the aquatic center. That we still have quite a bit of invoicing that we haven't received, so it has not yet gone through the DSA approval, but that project is estimated to be about $12 million, a little over $12 million. We're hopeful that once the final invoices and the claim that we currently have in place right now for that project, we could end up being with a little bit less than that, but we're being conservative, so we're estimating the full amount of $12.2 million. We've also completed the restroom at the additional restrooms at LAE and Hopkinson, and that turned out to be about $1.8 million. And then we're working on, and we have replaced a lot of our playgrounds, and that turned out to be it's going to be about 3.8, hopefully less, but like I said, we're being conservative and also including the 10% contingencies and so on and so forth, but hopefully it'll turn out to be a little bit less. As well as the scoreboards, we have in the budget estimated 3 scoreboards. We've completed 2, the baseball and the softball scoreboards. The budget here also includes the track and field, but there's a potential possibility that track and field could be embedded with the scope of the gym. so that there could be a potential savings within this amount. And then, of course, we completed the battery backup project in all of our school sites, and that was about $2.8 million. So all of our current projects that we have completed or will be completed is about $111 million.
May I ask a quick question?
Absolutely. Oops.
So I know, because I haven't been around as long as Mrs. Catulli, but I've been around a long time. And so I know that the prices that we originally started with have gone up substantially when we got, and it's not change orders or anything like that, it's just the cost of construction,
Correct.
which everybody knows and understands. But the numbers that we're looking at now, especially for the multi-story building, I guess, is the most prominent one, are because of the way that we did go out to bid. This number shouldn't change dramatically, correct?
That's correct. We don't anticipate increasing. We do have a 10% contingency embedded in, about 5%. So it's really tight because we did do a lease back. So the cost is pretty close.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I just want to remind the board, wow, that seems loud and yours seems soft. Ooh, and I have a loud voice. That these are the hard and the soft costs. So earlier when we take a look at construction costs, it's also the architectural fees, the DSA, submittal fees, the fees for coordinating, whether we have a bond program manager, or as you know, the position's now vacant, or whether we use consultants for some program management as well. So all of these fees are embedded within. The only thing that these are kind of the projects that we've already committed or are in the process of, other than one of the scoreboards at LAHS. So you could feasibly make a decision differently there, as well as some of the playgrounds have not been implemented, but as you know, they were all planned to be completed this summer, and then there was a fire at the plant. So otherwise, these are all the projects committed, and where you'll start to see is prices are always more than we hope. And the remaining funds, we have more needs than we do funding dollars at this point. So as we consider future projects, we will want to take a look from the board how you want us to prioritize the remaining projects that we think that we can do moving forward. I mean, we don't need the direction today because I think there's some big decisions. You might want to sit on it, but we want to present the information to you tonight, answer any questions that you have if there's more information that you want. But we will probably want to follow up soon to get that direction in terms of gym, high school modernization, and PAC. And you'll see there's not enough to do all probably yet.
And the reason I asked the question is just that I want the public to be aware that may have seen the numbers that went out with the bond, why there is a difference because of the escalations in cost. And that I know we built some of that in, but I do think that sometimes, I think we originally thought the new multi-story building would be about 50 to 55. So I just want to make sure that we're connecting those dots for people.
And can you, where's the third scoreboard? Where does that not?
It's anticipated to be the field and track.
John Barnes Field.
The John Barnes Field on the track and field. But potentially, as you'll see, the second gym could be there, and perhaps on the exterior wall, that could be a good location. So it could be, maybe not really be viewed as a savings, it's just you don't want to count the cost twice. That cost could be embedded within the second gymnasium cost as opposed to a separate line item for the scoreboard. There's also been some conversation, if maybe having the scoreboard, if you can think of where the stands are, or having a secondary one where the stands are facing out kind of the edge of the track where people could see that. And if, as we have promotions, et cetera, if it was a video one, you could even use it in that sense. But again, these just add dollars, so we're going to have to prioritize between the various levels that we need between the spaces that we have.
Thank you, Dr. Pulver. So as we move forward, our revenue sources, where are we pulling the funds to complete the projects and maybe any potential future projects? So our Measure G was for $96 million. Measure K we currently have 23.5 million. We have sold some bonds, but there's still funds available there. Unfortunately, we can't access those. It's about $3.6 million that we can access within the 10 years or more. Interest earned from bonds, we anticipate that it's about $1.1 million. It could be a little bit more depending on how the interest rates turn out. And then developer fees, we anticipate $3.7 million in revenue that we could generate to complete some of these projects. Then we have state matching funds. We've received $5 million, and special reserve, which for capital outlay, Fund 40, we've had about $11.5 million. And that's the board's commitment that we've established that fund for many years. The board decided to put $2 million. Unfortunately, we've stopped making that contribution because of the general fund, but we have been able to put some money into that fund to account for some of these projects. As well as the battery backup rebates, we anticipate to receive $915,000. Those funds have been trickling in right now. It's going to take about maybe 5 years before we actually see the full $915,000, but we're including it as part of revenue that we anticipate to receive. So total facility-related funds that we anticipate having is $141 million. So as you can see, our budgeted cost for all of our current projects that we have already committed, $111 million, that only leaves us $30 million in potential future projects. We also have cash flow borrowing for that purpose is in case we decide to start a project now, but we can't access the Measure G or Measure K funds. We can borrow from Fund 20, which we have about $18.4 million. We also have funds in Fund 67, our self-insurance health benefit fund. We have $6.6 million, and our child development, which is $6.5 million. So for cash borrowing purposes, we do have that availability to borrow. And then once we are able to sell, for example, bonds, and once we receive all the other funds, let's say developer fees as the years go on, and we actually do accumulate the $3.7 million that we're anticipating, we would pay those funds back to the appropriate funds.
May I ask a question? As
Absolutely.
kind of a new person to all of these funding maneuvers, how dangerous is that to the budget when we borrow? I mean, is any of this catastrophe related that would put us in jeopardy?
No,
Okay.
there really isn't. We could borrow at any time should we need to.
Okay, thank you.
It's our money, so we're not going out to a bank and borrowing it. These are reserved funds for particular areas. So we're not necessarily advocating to pull the money permanently. It's just to help you because you can't secure all $96 million from Measure G at one time. But if you start projects sooner, you probably save the district more money in construction and escalation costs. So it really is a savings. That money is not doing other than earning some interest. And other than Fund 20 that is now invested, that the board did previously, where it is earning quite a good interest rate, the other two aren't. It's just in the county treasurer. So it behooves to stretch the district dollars farther to get construction sooner rather than delaying and have the escalation of cost.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
No problem. The comment that I really wanted to make is that our special reserve for capital outlay, we as a prior board, and boards can never encumber future boards. So when a board makes a decision, you just kind of hope it was so good, everybody wants to jump in on it. But I believe that was the fund that we set aside in hopes of never having to go out for a bond again.
That's
That
correct.
we wanted to commit enough district dollars so that when needs came up, we could take care of it. If anyone has been in our PAC or attended any sporting event in our gym, there is a need. So it isn't like we're taking funds for a special opportunity and using it inappropriately. I would just kind of wanted to make that clear.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, just as a reminder, we've probably had well over $10 million. One of the pledges to the community was, and taxpayers, if you're asking us to tax ourselves a second time, how much of your own general fund dollars are you putting in skin in the game? So in essence, if it's been over $10 million, we put in more than 10% of what of the most recent bond. And why you see some payment back is because even the battery backup, where we paid 2.8 million out of Fund 40, we're going to put the cash rebates back in, but we're also going to be saving the general fund, what we hope, in the electricity costs over the next 30 years, or 15 years, 10 to 15 years for the battery backup, because that's not the solar. That should save the general fund a little each year. So
That's correct. All right, well, thank you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to CJ.
Thank you. Okay, so throughout our really exploring our options for the gym, we've collaborated quite extensively with the site administrators and the user groups for the gym. And we were able to prioritize the core components of the gym, and we actually have them listed here in order, in a priority order. As we go through this list, you'll notice that the highlighted items would be part of a competition gym only, and they wouldn't necessarily be a part of a practice gym. So the first and priority need that was identified by the site is really practice space and the need for 3 practice courts with 1 full regulation CIF court in the middle of the 3 practice courts. In this gym, we would be looking to have an HVAC system for cooling and restrooms for exterior access that would also serve our track and field for any other events that take place on the campus. Right now, there's really a need for restrooms, permanent restrooms on our campus, especially for our outdoor events that we really aren't able to fill with the facilities that we currently have. In addition, in a competition gym, we would have our retractable bleachers seating approximately 1,800 students or spectators. In addition to that, we would have our 2 team rooms. And like I said, this is part of a competition gym only. So this is the rooms that would be used during like halftime or during a break, or essentially the visiting team's locker room, the home team's locker room. And to continue on, we would have the sports medicine classrooms. Now, if you remember with the multi-story building, we were applying for a CTE grant for sports medicine. And then as we applied for that grant, we found out we were not able to get it on the STEM building, and we thought it would be much better served in the gym building. So we are going to continue to make those efforts to apply for that. And that's something we'd be looking to do in a competition gym as well. So, and as Elvia mentioned earlier, we have our track and field scoreboard that we would really want to try to incorporate it into this project to create a single aesthetic feel for the track, field, and gymnasium, really give it a face for the athletics of our high school. Following down the list, we have an operable curtain wall. The idea behind the operable curtain wall would be that one of our basketball courts would be able to be sectioned off so that we could have 2 different sports practicing at the same time, or host a game while another team, or one of our JV teams or another team, is utilizing that 3rd court to practice. In a competition gym, we would also have a snack bar along with a ticket booth. And then as it always goes at our high school, we can always use more storage, and that would be in either a practice or a competition gym, is just storage overall. Now, as we collaborated with the site, we really reached out and we asked some of our coaching staff, some of our assistant principals, what are the gyms that you have actually visited and that you see would meet the needs of our campus? And one of the gyms they really identified was Godinez High School Gymnasium in Santa Ana. And this gym features 3 courts with an operable wall. It does have limited bleachers, but it was referenced as a design because the site really identified that need for practice space. Really, they prioritized that over the bleachers or spectator seating.
CJ, how many people currently can be seated in our gym?
That's a tough question. I would say probably 1,100 or 1,200, and that'd be on the top end.
Okay. Okay. Because 1,800 just doesn't seem like very many. And would that be that's from the sides So it comes out into
So-
those other two courts?
So
I've been
at
in gyms like
Godinez
that
High
before.
School, they really have limited bleachers.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be really a good example of a gym design where you would see those 1,800 seats in there.
Okay.
This is just really a reference to show what the site felt would meet their needs, to give everyone kind of a visual of a gym that would work. One of the difficulties with increasing our spectator seating capacity is just the valuable real estate. Every amount of space that we're taking, and as you see on the next slide, it has a significant cost to
Yeah.
it. Yep. Yeah, so that is actually where we got the Godinez High School. It was
Items number 1 through 11 that you see on the prioritized on the slide here, that is from the school and their priority. So their first priority would be have 3 practice courts. Their second priority would be have an HVAC system. Third, restrooms. So this is the priority from staff.
correct. This exact design for Godinez High School wouldn't necessarily be able to accommodate all of our priorities, but it was just used as an example of a gym that they felt would meet the needs of their campus. Their priorities range from absolutely necessities to more of a more wants, or as we go down that list. So if we had to eliminate something as the budget permits, we would be starting at the bottom and working our way up.
I think the thing about Godinez High School that they liked was that it had that operable wall. So that if you're, whether it's a practice court or whether it's a competition, that having that operable wall in the middle still gives them the flexibility to have 2 teams practicing, or a JV perhaps, et cetera. Or 2 teams in the wall kind of blocking it from the ball going all over the place. Volleyballs, basketball, you pick the sport.
Correct.
So this has got 3 courts, but does this design, it looks like it's got 2 team rooms. Does it also have space for the sports medicine classroom?
No, this would not have space for sports medicine. Like I said, it was just an example that the site provided.
Because when they go to 4, 5, and 6, they're definitely, our coaches are going more towards the competition because they want the team rooms, they want the bleachers, they want the sports med classes, right?
Correct. Yeah. The primary goal, though, initially is the practice space. So we could, I believe some of our sports teams, we have to rent out court space at a local facility just because we don't have the practice space available for our students. And from talking with our athletic director over at the high school, he's really identified that practice space was his primary goal.
Yeah, the feedback from our site is because we have so many different sports and they're all trying to compete for space during hours where students don't have to wake up incredibly early or stay incredibly late, to also prioritize our other which of academics, would be to have more space. So the site would prefer, when we take a look at what can we afford, whether is it a competition or a practice, they would prefer a 3-court practice over a 2-court competition, because it really is about trying to maximize more space opportunities for teams and groups of students to use. You'll see once you turn it into a competition gym, it's about a $1.5 to $2 million additional cost, whether it's a 2-court competition or a 3-court. It's just at some point the decision for this board and for all of us will be that additional 1.5, 1.8, does that make sense in a 40, 50-year lifespan to have all of that? Because you're never going to go back and redo this gym. So what is the overarching vision? The true need is going to be the space, which they will say is the 3-court. And I think they would certainly welcome a competition. But when you look at something for 40, 50 years and you're never going to go back and touch it, what is that? That's going to be the rub that we're going to have to assess, I think, along the road, along with competing other interests that we have.
CJ, I know this little diagram is just an example.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I totally agree with the 3 courts. Having seen neighbors and granddaughters who have to either be there at 7 a.m. or they're walking off the campus at 9 p.m. because of court time. So I totally get and support the 3 courts, almost like regardless what we do, we need to have that much space for all of our teams. Well, I have a question, and you might be able to say, I can't answer that because we don't actually have an architect drawing plans. But I was thinking it because also, like, I'm going for volleyball because that's a sport I go to all the time. They'll have the JV and the Frosh-Soft JV and then the varsity. And so you have to wait until all those kids have played. So if you have more than one gym, you can have the JV and the Frosh going at the same time. So would there be any bleachers at all for a small group of people, probably not more than a couple of hundred really, who would come to watch something in the, do they, I guess I say, is it uncommon to have a small number of bleachers in a practice gym?
Most practice gyms that I've seen do have a small number of bleachers. Just because you often have parents or other coaches that you just want to spectate, even practice, and those can be used during games. And a lot of times when we have tournaments, we have multiple games going on at once.
Right.
So it kind of, the seating might be a bit more limited, but there's still a lot of spectators that would want to watch those games.
Thank you. I was just
Yeah,
thinking
it would
ahead.
probably behoove yourselves to give yourself some flexibility so that if you wanted to have a lower level, but so I think all those things are possible once you design it. It's just when you add a lot of bleachers, you're expanding your footprint and the elevation of the ceilings typically because if they're folded in. And so that affects the overarching cost. But I don't think it's going to be zero necessarily.
Yeah, right, but I just think that it'd be more efficient to be able to have 2 games going at once when you're in your season. But yeah,
Absolutely.
and it does come down to time and money. And
I think the main difference is you wouldn't be holding all campus assemblies in a practice gym.
great, thank you.
And then just a reminder I got from our tech, if you can make sure you speak into the mic and make sure your mic is on. They won't be able to hear you on YouTube if you're speaking and the mic is off.
And we would still not accomplish that goal of being able to have, and it's, because we have 3,000 students at our high school.
Right. I think we arrived at the 1,800 number by having it split. So as you can see, as we move on to the next slide, we have several estimates of what these options might look like. And before we dive into those numbers, I really wanted to get everyone an understanding of how we got there. So we really looked at two gyms nearby that seemed to have, they had 3 courts and they seemed to follow the same construction methods that we would be looking at with our gym, and that includes Pacifica High School Gymnasium and Sonora High School Gymnasium. And Pacifica High School Gymnasium was actually designed by the same architects that have designed and are administrating our multi-story building, which is West Group. And that gymnasium cost $435 per square foot. That was 2 years ago, I believe, it was completed. And as you see right below that, we have Sonora High School Gymnasium, which came out to be $495 per square foot. Due to these both being past numbers, so when you talk about the square footage number and the cost of a gym, it is something that is bid on about a year to a year and a half before the gym is complete. So you got to think these numbers are coming from, if it was completed in 2017, it's really a 2015, 2016 economy number. So as time progresses, we have to make sure we encapsulate these costs. And that's why we generally go with our general contractor to give us the most accurate number, because they're the ones bidding it, they're the ones building it. So what we did is we went to our multi-story contractor, who's actually building several gyms right now, and they gave us an estimate at $533 per square foot. And just due to the escalation and all of the data that we have, we believe this number to be most in line with what we can expect for a gym project. The reason why we're using
We
this...
hope it's less, but we'd rather budget for the higher.
Yeah.
So that there's
I'm
no
not-
surprises.
I'm not hopeful.
We will always, as you know, even we did this with the multi-story, we try to value engineer certain things to make the cost go down while still keeping the integrity of the project. So we will always do that due diligence no matter what.
And so as you can see, we have our, we're starting off with the 2 practice options for a gym. On each of these options, we're utilizing that same $533 per square foot. You can see the practice 2 court has 17,000 square feet with a approximate 9 million construction and a 2 million soft cost. Now, really what you're looking at with your construction costs is typically around 75% of the project, where your soft costs are going to be around 25%. Now, we've also included an escalation contingency just so that we're covered in the unpredictable economy, that whether it comes in a little bit more than we anticipate or a little bit below, we want to make sure that we have some coverage and have a conservative number. And that's how we get to a $12 million estimate for a practice 2 court gym. And then as you can see, as you go to practice 3 court, there's a substantial square footage difference between a 2 court and a 3 court. And it really, at the end of the day, you're looking at a $12 million versus an $18 million gym, just in terms of practice 2 court to practice 3 court. And as you can see, you move down to the competition gyms. They aren't, a competition 2 court is about 5,000 more square feet than a practice 2 court. And you can see that comes to be about 15 million. And the competition 3 court comes out to be about 21 million. And I believe we previously provided an estimate that was at that 20 million mark. And you can see that the escalation contingency is just that contingency that we would want to have in there because of the unpredictability of the upcoming market or economy.
And is this with all of the 18, if we got the last one, it would be the 1,800 seat bleachers
Correct.
and the sports med, all of
Correct.
that's incorporated into this cost.
Correct.
It's factored into the square footage because you'll notice there's a 4,000 square footage increase from a 3 court practice to a 3 court competition. And then you're just amortizing out the 4,000 times 533. So yes, I do think I'm a little more hopeful that we could get closer to the 20 million like we originally said if we were to begin sooner, if that was the course, because of that escalation of 1.5, or we would try to value engineer it down. I also would say that when we did the multi-story and the CTE grant, how much of a grant did we receive for the robotics? Or did we not receive it? Mike?
We anticipate to receive about $1.2 million.
So I think that's something to think about. So if we got comparable amount of dollars for the sports medicine classroom to tack onto this, I would recommend that regardless if it's a 3 court practice or a 3 court competition, that we at least design the option, because if we can get the funding for it, why wouldn't we want to have that? And it might, and as you see, it might even pay for a difference between the competition and the practice, or close enough. It might not, because it's going to be based upon the square footage of the classroom, which the robotics room was much bigger. But it may still, that even though on the previous slide where he highlighted yellow, what's competition and what's practice, that might be an option we work with the architect to design either way, and then you take that out if we don't get the grant.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons we really prioritize those core components, so that as the budget permits, we can add scope or decrease scope as necessary. All right, moving on to the high school classroom modernization.
I had one other quick question, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Would that, back 2 slides, we do have the space to do 30,000 square feet?
Correct. It would be in that area that's highlighted in yellow in the picture in the top right. We do have the space there.
And it looks like some of the portable, it would take out obviously portables, but also like the containers? I mean,
There's containers, and there's also a maintenance shed there as well. And really, that's why storage was really necessary as part of the gym. And that's really one of those components that, even though it's at the bottom of the list, would be really hard to take out because our site always needs storage.
Right.
But yeah, so we would have to relocate those areas. Now, we have to keep in mind also that our multi-story building is adding a significant amount of classrooms to the campus. so
Yeah,
that
all those portals are planned
To
for
go
the-
out,
to go
yes,
away for
right.
the most part, anyways. Once you do the multi-story.
Right.
So what we're really hoping in irregardless is if you think about it, this is what you would see as you're driving up the the parking lot for the students, et cetera.
Right.
So you no matter what, when you first drive up, you see these sheds, et cetera, that we wouldn't want to have. You're going to want to create now another
Like entrance.
entrance and appeal to Griffin, being a Griffin or being at Los Alamitos High School like we do for the front, not to the same grandiose extent. I'm not saying that, but that it has, you're now kind of coming upon where all of our athletics
Our
are.
athletic facility.
If you think about it, the pool's right next to it, then the tennis courts are right next. You have all of the fields right behind it, and you have the track and field to the right. So you'll want to create a space that does feel like, for many of our families that might be coming to a sporting event, that you're not trying to, where is such and such,
Right.
So that has a true way to find out visitors, et cetera.
And we would retain the old gym.
We would,
Correct.
yes. So we'll have 2 gyms.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. All right, moving on to a classroom modernization. Now, the project goals for this would really be at a minimum just beautification items like flooring, suspended ceilings. HVAC is a lot of our units are nearing that 20-year mark where they absolutely are requiring a replacement. And then as we get further into a modernization in terms of scope, we have technology upgrades, projectors, data drops, wireless upgrades. These are all things that can be used on our campus and are needed in several areas. The numbers you're about to see do not include any reconfiguration of walls or classrooms. One of the things I wanted to make sure that with the buildings at our high school, they are a concrete tilt-up structure, so that we have to really be careful when we're reconfiguring walls in a lot of spaces. So there's a significant cost when we do that. So we really, in these terms, we wanted to minimize those costs and really concentrate on the things that will benefit our students the most. And you can see this first list of items are what I would consider to be the bare minimum of a modernization or a beautification project for the campus. And these consist of the flooring, the ceiling tiles, paint, marker boards, HVAC, and new roofing. In a similar fashion to the gym, we took our classroom space at 167,000 square feet, and we took unit costs for each one of these items that were provided through comparative means data and other projects going on in the state of California. Now,
Are marker boards whiteboards?
correct.
Okay, thank you.
And as you can see, if the scope on each of these items is in a range. So as we go through the projects, as the budget permits, if we wanted to decrease scope, we could do less flooring in some of our newer areas, or say we have new marker boards in several of our classrooms, we might not replace those. So there is some wiggle room in each of these individual items in terms of the extent that we carry out the work. But this is a good estimate for all of our classrooms to have this work done.
CJ, I'd just like to make a comment because when I was on the prior page, I, as many years ago, worked as a parent volunteer on our first Measure K bond. And my first reaction was, we just did all that. And then I did the math. It's almost 35 years ago.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I thought we just did the age back, 35 years ago.
Goes quick.
So CJ, how many, I mean, I'm new to all this. How many classrooms is this that have to be modernized?
I want to say it's about 120, I want to say.
Yeah, okay, I'm just.
Would this include the two-story building also?
It does.
Okay, thank you.
So some of this work we have tried to get ahead of. So if you remember last summer, we replaced a lot of our carpet in the two-story building. So that is where we might see some savings in terms of flooring, those costs coming down. So over these next years, while we're building the gym or carrying on to other projects, we're really going to try to use our deferred maintenance budget to knock out some of these more cosmetic options as we can over the summer. And that's just something that we can do to help minimize the cost of the modernization as a whole.
Yeah, and it's probably less than 120 because remember, you're going to have 30 classrooms in the
They're brand
multi-story.
new.
There's about probably a little more than 125 FTE or so at the high school. So, but there's all these other little areas as well for ed specialists, speech, et cetera. So.
What is the cost to remove all of those temporaries?
That's,
The interim housing that's currently there, we have that built into our multi-story cost.
Oh,
So-
good, okay.
So it would not be an additional
That's not
cost.
a new one.
So it's part of that 67.
I don't want to know.
part of that
I wanna know
67.
if it's-
Now, I want to clarify, Mrs. Davidson, are you talking about the interim housing, or are you talking about the 30 portables that we need to remove once it's done?
The
The portables
third-
that have been there for 20, 30 years.
Yeah, those. The 30.
So we have talked about those portables with our contractor for the multi-story as well, and they have been amendable to removing those with the removal of the other interim housing. At this time, I'd have to see if it's. I haven't had these discussions with them since we were bidding out the multi-story about a year ago. So I kind of have to refresh to see if they're still able to meet those commitments. But they have previously committed to being able to do that.
But some of it may depend upon the timing of when you do things, because it may save the district dollars to keep those buildings, some of them there, while you're modernizing. While you're modernizing a campus, you're going to need interim housing. And so we may not have to pay interim housing if we can still just use our old buildings until we're done with our modernization construction as well.
Absolutely. That was one of the primary concerns, because we would like to have space to kind of play musical chairs as we modernize. As you can see on this next slide, we really have our electrical and technology upgrades that would really make it a modernization for the campus. And these include electrical outlets for any additional audio-visual equipment, data drops for that same audio-visual equipment, projectors, clock, PA speakers. And like I said previously, the extent of the scope of each of these items can vary depending on how far we want to carry out each item. If some of our classrooms have newer projectors, you can expect that cost to lower some.
And so what we'll still have to do is we just mirrored the modernization to be similar to the other mods that we've done at our other school sites. The high school, I would say, it's probably had more construction on their classrooms, so some of their needs may not be as significant. Well, it'll be significant, it's a big campus, but may not be to the same level that all of our other classrooms. And so wherever we can save some dollars there, we certainly would. And constantly assess, is data drops the right way to go now? We used to want to have multiple drops in rooms. Is it really now more about wireless access points? And so you limit the number of drops, but instead you have more wireless, et cetera. So there could be some savings within this. We need to do more of an input from the site as well. But to help us get some priorities, we wanted to at least give you, what have we done with our others to give you that picture? Because again, you'll see we can't achieve everything.
so when we did the infrastructure, that stopped at the wall.
Correct. So that stopped at the outside of each building at the panel. Now, from there into the classroom is any work that we would be trying to accomplish through the modernization. And as you can see, grand total, including everything you've seen on this list, would put us at about $20,300,000. And that is, like I said, everything on the previous slide and on this slide for the modernization. Now, on this next slide, we paired up our options with our gymnasium options and our modernization. We used each of our options for the gym, and then we used the maximum of our modernization just to have a conservative number. So you could see if we went with a 2-court practice and the maximum modernization, we would have an additional funding required of $1.8 million. And now that $1.8 million is what is in excess of the $30,600,000 that you see for remaining future projects. Excuse me. And as you go down, you could see that as the cost of the gym increases, you could see our additional funding required increases accordingly. So at a 3-court competition and at a maximum modernization of 20.3, we would have an 11.2 million shortfall that we would require additional funding.
I'm sorry. I must have spaced out for a minute because I don't understand at all what I'm looking at.
So we have our gym options, and then we have our gym estimated cost, and then we
Right.
tried to pair those options up with the 20.3 for how much a modernization to the campus would cost, to give you guys, to give everyone a picture of what it would look like if we were to do a full modernization and one of the gym options.
Got it. Okay.
So let me walk you each line.
Got it. Okay. I got
Notice
it.
what's missing though is anything to the PAC. So what we're trying to show is we don't have the funds at this point to do everything.
So
we're
we don't
gonna
even
have
have
make
enough to do
we
a
don't.
2-court practice and the modernization.
Well, let me get there in a little
Okay.
bit, because I think we do have some other options that'll make it look a little bit better pending decisions by the board. So in the first line, you're saying a 2-court practice and a modernization. Remember, the 2-court practice could be around 12.2 million. It's the modernization that has a swing of about 7 million, depending if we do everything or we just do the flooring, the HVAC, et cetera. And we don't do all the electrical, the projectors, et cetera. I don't know if they need as much electrical. So I do think that there'll be some savings within there. So if all of that is said and done, with our 30 million we have remaining, you potentially, if everything gets stretched to the max, you're $1.8 million short to do those 2 projects. If we do a 2-court competition in modernization, I'll cut to the chase, you're now about $5.5 million short to do all, if the modernization was the full scope. I believe it won't. If you do a 3-court practice and a full modernization of the high school, you're about $8.3 million short. And again, for the full scope of the mod, which I think you could probably shave a couple. I'm hopeful. And then if you do a 3-court competition and the full modernization, you're at 11.2 over that we don't have the funds for. And all of these still is saying, we haven't done anything with the PAC. Now we've tried to do some things, and there's been some discussion. Could some of that be within the modernization? Maybe, but might that just increase the modernization dollar? So I think we would need to get some more research on that. That being said, so now you're seeing no matter, gosh, we can't do either one, even the bare minimum. But there are some options that I think that the previous boards has shared. So if you recall, the Child Development Fund used to have a balance of about 8 million. And then through COVID, we probably over $1 million. When we reduced the rates for the employees and obviously the decline for the child care enrollment, the previous board had said we could consider using the reserve of that. So about $7 to $8 million of that to help fund, since we knew we were going to be short. So we're still short. So there's now about $6.5 million available. You want to leave that fund with some reserve, so that if they had another situation like COVID, they could absorb that. So you could
Which fund was
potentially.
that?
What's that?
Which is the one?
The child care
Oh, that was the
development
child
fund.
care we want to leave money in.
Well, there's yes, to leave some. Well, so we think we could take there's about what, 7 million? So we think we can take it up to 6.5. If you wanted to leave $1 million, then you could take 6 million. So if you go, so there's 6.5 million that Mrs. Galicia is earmarking. This isn't, all these other funds we're not touching to borrow from. I mean, they're all just as for cash flow, but that's just, that is a fund that the previous board had given us direction because we knew we had more needs, but some of the costs have gone up. That we were hoping to also try to commit something to the PAC. Well, now you're seeing as costs go up. If we can go back to the very last slide we were on when we were talking. One more, 2 more. One more. Keep going. There you go. So now if you think about the 6 million, potentially if we sweep that from the reserve of the child development, you're very close to the 3-court practice and the 3-court modernization. You're 8.3 in the hole, so now you're a couple million off. CJ has some more good news to potentially share with you.
And I first would like to also include, Andrew mentioned this earlier, the CTE grants aren't included in here as well. So there's other
Good point. Thank you.
other funds in there as
So
well.
that's another 1.2.
And then if we sports medicine as well. So that could be
That
another.
we can't bank on yet, but we're pretty confident about the 6.5 from child development. If this new board wants to give us direction to consider those dollars. So that's why we haven't put it yet, because I don't know where the current board stands on that. And this was at a previous board meeting, and I remember going to the high school talking about this as well. So this is no secret. And then how much of the CTE grant? 1.2, and then CJ share the other potential.
As we've been proceeding with all of our projects and working with our architect and design teams, we've been actively trying to identify any funding measures or cost saving measures that we can throughout the bond or throughout any project on the bond. And one of the things that our design team, and I really have to give credit to West Group for this, is they found a seismic mitigation funding grant because we demoed the existing administration building. We're replacing it with a new 3-story building. Us demoing that concrete tilt-up building allows us to apply for a seismic mitigation funding grant, which our design team is hopeful that we could earn up to $3 million. So we are currently applying now, and it has a 4 to 6 month time till we hear about our eligibility in that process. As these agencies return back from COVID, we're hoping it's closer to that 4-month mark. But our design team is confident about this, and they have successfully applied for the grant in similar situations in other districts like Garden Grove. So we're very hopeful that we will be able to increase our revenues.
And remember, should the state ever add a bond for matching funds, we would be in the queue. We would be less, as you know, they have a new formula, how they allocate it. It's not first in, first receiving. It's a new formula, which we don't necessarily automatically have the best chance. But there's an opportunity there. But again, the state hasn't passed a bond, so we're not counting on any matching funds like we did previously here. But if we received another CTE grant for sports medicine, maybe that could be between $500,000 to $1 million. But just with what we just mentioned, the child development reserve, the CTE grant for robotics, and the potential $3 million, that's about $10.7 million additional. So that could now say, instead of $30-point-something million, 30.6, you could now have an additional 10.7 million. So that would get us right within between the 3-court practice, the 3-court competition, and the mod. Or is the board wanting us, but we should probably hold out at least $1 million or $2 million for the PAC. I personally believe at the bare minimum, the PAC, the bathrooms are completely inadequate. And we have talked, there might be a way where you could add some bathrooms on the outside, where some of those large cypress or whatever those trees are, and you maybe reconfigure a portion of the lobby. But even that is, you saw how expensive bathrooms were just at LAE and Hopkinson. What was it for those 2 sites? It was 1.8?
1.8.
So it doesn't get you super far.
Andrew, has this PAC staff given input to what they need, what they're looking for in the PAC remodel?
We have not, because if early, not specifically, early in the big picture when we were trying to consider could we get a bond passed, we did a whole needs assessment, a 10-year facility master plan, and certainly we had, and that had, some of you may recall, there was how great would it be to tear down and build a brand new PAC? And I think at that time the estimate was somewhere between $50 million or $40 million or something, certainly significant. When we went out and surveyed our community and realized the max really that they were going to probably support was under 100 million, because we had that gave a very different. From there, we realized we're not sure how much we can do. So it is going to be an uncomfortable decision, because at some point, the dilemma is, do we do a gymnasium over doing something for the PAC? Do a little bit for both? The problem is sometimes a little bit for both doesn't really get you anything. So now would you have accomplished nothing, as opposed to really thinking about you're never going to touch certain buildings another time, probably for 40, 50 years. So these are difficult decisions because we don't have the funding to do everything. And no matter what, there will be a group that thinks you prioritize one of the A's over another A.
Yeah.
Right.
That is a fact. So
That's why I just, if there was some kind of balance between them, and I'm learning a lot tonight as far as
Yeah.
the balance and, okay.
the PAC is, originally we were hoping that if we were ever to build a new PAC, could have more seating. There may be some things that CJ has shared that we could take a look at piecemealing along the road through our deferred maintenance budget, where the last summer we've done some of their back rooms. It's more cosmetic, it's paint, it's a few other things.
Flooring, and one of the other things that we're looking at doing is when we remove the interim housing that we recently installed for the
Good point, share that.
for the multi-story, is we would like to really open up that back side of the PAC to have an outdoor amphitheater, similar like what you have at Oak, and have a larger area that they would be able to utilize on the back side as well.
So I think COVID taught us that. If many of you went to the senior awards, we went to the show choir event, and even if people brought their own chairs, because maybe that's also where our students have lunch. But even if adding some lighting, adding some other things to within that stage, that could create another opportunity for an outdoor venue and an indoor venue. I don't know if it would necessarily have seating like Oak or McAuliffe, maybe. But there may be a way to think more creatively that I think, and you saw how spectacular the show choir and a few of the other things
Very
were.
involving.
So there is some potential there.
One other thing I would like to include is with the multi-story building, we did create that large grand stair as well for those performances where we could have students on those stairs. They're extra wide and extra tall, where they would be able to line up and have performances on there as well, which is probably more aligned towards our choir or band type performances.
And that might be more at lunch or something. I'm not sure you'd have a huge audience from parents or things. Maybe.
Andrew, one time you talked about when we were looking at all of those models of the gyms, that kind of Disneyland, it was that perhaps could we build a building, but it sounds like square footage wise it wouldn't work, to build a building that ultimately could become, you could have bleachers put in later. It just, when I think, I was a teenager when this first gym was built and it's still standing, and can it, I know that's scary.
Will it still be standing?
I agree, I'm barely standing. So could it sustain, can it sustain being the competition gym for another 50 years? I feel like to build this gigantic gym and to not be able to make it a competition gym, can the other one work for us?
Well, I want to remind, so when we did measure the second Measure K, remember about $50 million of that went to the high school in different projects. They did modernize to some level the gymnasium, all new bleachers, some of the sound system, the team rooms, the locker rooms. So there has been some work to it to expand the life of the life of it. So I do think it's always wise, back to the original question, is one of the things we had talked about, if we can't accomplish everything, should we at least design it where maybe phase 2 in 10 years or 15 years, when additional funding, maybe there is state matching funds down the road or something, where, okay, we would add that snack bar, but we're going to already have somewhat of a design like in the footprint, or we would add the bleachers. So if we know that's something down the road, we know we would need the additional supports or things, but we're not going to do it now, but we can do it in 10, 15 years. Because in about 10, 12 years, maybe, The remaining 4 point something or $3.4 million of Measure K, the last remaining droplets of Measure K, we can draw from. But that's 10 to 12 years down the road right now. So
Probably won't buy a snack
that
shack
could,
in
but
10
that,
to 12 years.
on another note, you could think about that for the PAC, but that's like a 10 to 12 year.
Right.
And then what I also hope, hasn't worked on all of these projects, but we do hope that there's some return. Remember, we typically budget, and if we've budgeted successfully, we usually get some money back from a project. That didn't happen with the infrastructure, it was exact. But we believe it's going to happen with the pool. I hope it happens with the multi-story. And so there may be some opportunities to re-garner a few hundred thousand all the way up to $1 million, maybe even by the time you add the gym, the second, the modernization, et cetera. I think the question is really as well as what is the full scope of the modernization at the high school need? Because we've done a lot of different things along the road. If you recall, when we did elementary, we had roof leaks. You couldn't turn on a heater in one room or a microwave or something without the power going out somewhere else, short circuit. The high school doesn't have the same problems like that at the other schools. They might in a few rooms, and I would bet they're in the portables that are eventually going to be removed as opposed to the permanents. So there may be a little bit where that max cost of the modernization would be less, unless we just folded some of the stuff within the PAC mod within that. So it's not an exact science, but you can see there's more need than project dollars. And remember, the other thing that we are no longer doing is the board was considering, when we were in different financial times, contributing $2 million of the general fund into Fund 40. So when we made a decision last May, we have to stop that because that was the low-hanging fruit. And on top of that, even though the state budget's gotten better, the declining enrollment for us hasn't. So we not recommended that we could continue on that path. That already probably took out 5 years of that $2 million. So a $10 million that we are earlier, the previous board was factoring in on some of these things. And where we thought, well, maybe we can do a $5 to $7 million something for the PAC. That is the impact of no longer contributing the general fund dollars over there.
So you answered the question about matching funds. They've changed the criteria. We don't even know if there's going to be a bond available. And then typically the state has not, in a very long time, provided any money for infrastructure or for any, it's just strictly our budget, our ADA budget, and if we want to figure out how to get money out of there for infrastructure, we can. And the only way they do it is through bonds, which have to be approved by the voters.
At Justin's, because Diana went to the outdoor performance, it was beautiful. At Justin's performance, he had introduced me to this man, John Forsythe. He's a parent in our community, president of the Orange County Philharmonic, and he says there is a sound system that will completely change the sound in the PAC if we did nothing else. For like Justin said 50,000. He said no, more like 100 to 150.
Yeah, all of those are things that we could consider doing already with our deferred maintenance, with other or part of the mod process. So there could be some things, but in terms of expanding seating, in terms of when you think about some PACs where the text, the lighting and the sound people, they take up a portion that would be front row, not front row, but the first level of seating, where in other places they're up above and there's a tiny little room there.
And it wasn't
the bathrooms
designed.
To me are the most inadequate. Extremely inadequate. And sometimes that folding when you're not using the tiered stairs. So there could be some repair things. We did I don't know if it was 3 or 4 years ago, maybe it was when Melissa was still at the high school as assistant principal. They did do the chairs, I believe.
Yes.
There as well.
Yeah.
So.
Hey, CJ, I thought you did a great job. It's really nice. I'm sure we helped you out. I think this is great, gives us some real nice food for thought. A couple things that come to my mind is, the big one is, certainly the PAC needs some TLC. I'd love to see what the people that are there have a wish list that we can go through. The thing that I see is we got, the gym is the gym. That's kind of a hard cost. You've got $7 million spread on the modernization, which is a pretty big chunk considering, that's a quarter of the entire, if you go to the high end. So, and the fact is that we just spent 50 million upgrading the high school. Me as a parent who was out there, I'm kind of like, what, you have to have another 20 million?
Yeah.
And we just put 50 million. It's a huge campus, so
Yeah.
I understand, but there's such discrepancy, you know what I'm saying? Is it 13 million? Is it 20 million? So that's kind of where I would like to see, because I definitely would like to see if we could not squeeze money out. I just don't know how you could squeeze money out of the gym versus.
The only way you do is making decisions about, do we only do a 2-court, even though the true need is 3? Do you do a practice or a competition?
50-year building.
If you want
to use it for 50 years, it makes sense to kind of, you scrimp it now to put a Band-Aid over here. Like you said earlier, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The gym, I think, is going to be the gym because that's a building. The PAC, what can we do to, I don't want to say placate the arts people, but they're important too. So we don't, and we don't want to set up this.
Their most
concern.
pressing needs.
Yeah.
So one of the
Right, and they're part of our constituency.
Yeah, I want
Oh, yeah.
everyone
What
to, everyone.
Scott's getting at is that
Yeah.
balance, can we possibly do something
Yeah.
to make
Right.
that, if it be a sound or a bathroom outside, something?
So that's what I'd like to see if you
So
can.
Yeah, we need some kind of numbers on the PAC.
absolutely.
And I know they're hard to come up with, but yeah, my whole thing is that we need bathrooms, not glamorous at all. People don't get excited that they can actually go to a bathroom during intermission unless they hadn't been able to before. But they're necessary. But the seating in that place has been just, I always wondered why they put the seats like that since I first walked on the campus. But
And I was looking at the modernization, HVAC and roofing. I mean, those, you can't really, you need to do all that. It's not like something you're not going to, like I said, those big chunk dollars, I don't see how you constrict. If all the HVAC is 20 years old,
yeah,
well, then it's all got to be replaced.
close to 30.
Yeah, the minimum mod was the 13, and that included the HVAC, the floors, et cetera. It's really about how much additional outlets are needed, how many data drops, projectors, and speakers. So that's really, it's the second page of that is whether that's that
And
$7 million.
Have we talked to the staff at the high school? Like, I don't know if it would just be the chairman heads, like, does the science department want, hey, we need data drops?
They're
Or does
getting all new
English-
buildings.
Yeah, the science is building. We're getting
So they're getting everything? But like, does,
So we need to do more of that. But
See.
what we prepared for the board tonight was what was done in a typical modernization at all other 8 sites. Where we have the most feedback is on the gymnasium, and the modernization we know we can't even do until the multi-story is done. We could begin working on the gymnasium, at least doing an architect, et cetera. So there's some decisions that's probably the next project. If we're going to do the gym, we should be getting some direction on. Because also the longer we wait, the escalation as well.
Right, it's costing more.
So, we can certainly piecemeal out a little bit more about the mod and about the PAC, but at some point we should probably decide at a minimum, what do we do with the gymnasium? Is it a 3-court comp, 3-court practice, or 2-court, et cetera?
I 100% agree. And as the list of what is the most logical order of these projects, you typically always want to do a modernization last to really wrap up the campus. And that also allows us the opportunity to use our deferred maintenance over those years where we're going to be building a gym, perhaps doing some PAC improvements to really chip away at that price too. So providing some direction on where we want to go with the gym we can work on really reviewing the scope of what the needs are for the PAC, and then further chip away at that modernization cost as time goes down.
Thank you, CJ.
Thank you, CJ. Great job.
That was amazing. Thank you. Thanks, Alvia.
Yeah.
Thank you both. So, any, that? Okay. That concludes the workshop. We thank you both. It was incredible, and we're moving to closed session. We will return at 6:30.